Well, good evening and welcome to the third virtual comp plan workshop with the Planning Commission of the City of Frederick. And with us is Brandon Mark. He's the lead on the process for this comp plan for the city, and he's the Division Manager of Community Planning and Urban Design. After I walk through the process and do a roll call, I'll turn it over to Brandon and he will introduce the rest of the staff and any subject matter experts that are on hand. So the process for tonight is that the staff will present the chapter overview. Then we will have questions and comments by the Planning Commission. Then the staff will go through each policy and the implementation points one by one, and we will have questions, comments, and discussion on each of the policies. After that, at the end, we will have public comment. Anyone who wishes to give public comment, the number to call is 929-229-5669, and there is a passcode, and that's 9524. It is 208-693-740#. We will announce this a couple times during the session, and when you call in, the process is I will see your phone number over there, and I'll call the last four numbers of your phone number. Then you will introduce yourself with your name and your address, and then you will be sworn in. So with that, I'll do a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns is present.
Commissioner Malice.
Commissioner Malice present.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I'm present. And just to note for the record that today's date is May 26th, 2020, and it's 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So now we'll turn it over to Brandon Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for volunteering your time to go over this evening. This evening, we're going to be discussing the municipal growth chapter. Present with me this evening is Joe Atkins, the Deputy Director for Planning, and Arash Giramani, our urban designer. I do believe Joe might have to step out at 7 for a ZBA hearing. I'm not sure if he's going to try to pull double time or not. With that said, this is the 6th special workshop we've had to discuss the comprehensive plan. We have 3 more scheduled. June 1st at 6 p.m. we'll be discussing the implementation chapter. June 9th at 6 p.m. we'll be discussing the roadway classification map. And lastly, June 22nd at 6 p.m. we'll be discussing the land use map and the reclassification request. If there's any questions, I can jump. Unless there's any questions, I can jump into the chapter or swearing in.
You first need to be sworn in, exactly. And so anyone else on the staff who plans to testify or do a presentation tonight, if you'd raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given and statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do. You give your name and say I do.
This is Brandon Mark, I do.
Joe Atkins, I do.
Thank you. So we'll turn this back over to Brandon then.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to share my screen to the municipal growth chapter layout, and then we will start going through it. Okay, so the overview of this chapter is basically how do we project growth in the 3 tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, and examine that relationship between the community services that we provide or the county provides or Frederick County Public Schools provides, and then community facilities, etc. So the basis of this chapter and really the foundation of it is Washington COG's population projection. And we use that throughout the plan for consistency to project our future populations and dwelling unit demand. So I'll jump in and just summarize where we've been and where COG believes we're going until 2045. So right now, our population is around, or in 2018, our population was 72,000, around 72,000. COG is projecting our population in 2020 to be 79,400. It may be a little high, I'm not sure. So that's the basis of our future population when we look at this chapter. So then in 2030, they estimate our population to be right around 90,000, and then 2040, 92,800, and 2045, 93,100. When we're looking at this population, much of our growth they're projecting is in between 2020 and 2025. Then it gradually slows until 2045, with between 15 years, it's only growing 3,000 residents, or 4,000, between 3,000 and 4,000 residents. I don't know if this is accurate, but it's definitely something that we need to take into account today and realize that when we update this plan in 10 years, that we'll have numbers that can project until 20, or more accurate, or take a benchmark of where we are and project better into 2045. The city has historically averaged about 25 to 30% of the county's population, and that is projected into the future. So in 2020, the county will be about 267,000, 2030, 303, and then 2040, 332. It's the same way with households. We've typically been around 30% of the county's dwelling units. So we're going to add a table here that shows that relationship and where we fulfill the housing demand for the county. So we have less residents, or a ratio of less residents but more dwelling units compared to the county. On average, we have about 2.5 residents per dwelling unit. That number has been decreasing. Here you see in 1950 it was about 3.25, and that has slowly decreased over time. In 2018, 2.46. So when we're making assumptions in this chapter, to make it easy, we're keeping it right around 2.5. That's about nationwide average, and it doesn't deviate much from that over the last 70 years. In this chapter next, we talk about growth, and this title might need change. As I was preparing for this meeting, I believe this title could be changed to be more applicable. But we talk about where growth may occur outside of Tier 1 and Tier 2. This map here shows the areas of the city that we provide sewer service. This map here shows areas within the city and outside the city in the county where the county provides sewer service. So when
Brandon, I'm
yes.
sorry. Is there any way you can zoom or expand your screen, because it's very small?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Let me see if I can zoom here. Okay, is that better?
Better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this map is, as we analyze where future growth may be, if a property owner / developer is considering being annexed into the city, down here, where in livable Frederick is shown as a county growth area, they might not have much incentive to be annexed into the city. I don't know if we'd offer them enough services for our tax rate plus the county's tax rate. So as you scroll through the chapter, we show potential, and this is very simplistic, potential areas of growth, and mainly because the size of parcels and the trends, right? So right now growth's trending up in the northwest quadrant. it seems like the city would start to grow to the northeast, and then again in the south. We anticipate growth. However, the county has shown that as growth that would occur and remain in the county. As we move through, it's important to understand some of the limitations. We have two water pressure zones, zone 595 and zone 462. The 462 provides water to the eastern side of the city. Zone 595 provides water to the western side of the city. I'm going to switch screens to the county or the city's 2006 water service master plan. But one thing that's important to realize is that as we develop westwardly or northern, that areas outside the zone 595 would be expensive or take extra infrastructure to provide water service to their areas. So it may be cost prohibitive for the city to provide it, or if a developer would offer that as part of their annexation agreement, that is a possibility. I'm going to switch screens because we're going to do a little bit more work to this map, but I'm going to show you in the 2006 water service master plan, if I can find it. Sorry, I'm having trouble finding it. Do you see that? Okay, so these areas in green are areas that cannot be serviced by our water supply. So one thing to realize is as we grow westerly, it may be cost prohibitive for these properties to provide that. I do need to consult with engineering to see if this is still accurate. And if there's been any updates or needs to be any updates, but the point of showing that in the comp plan is to realize the limitations as we move forward. So going back to municipal growth, as I stated, we are in the primary growth sector of livable Frederick. This area here is shown as possible areas of growth for the city of Frederick. Below Route 70, I-70 would be areas that are in the county's growth area. So we discussed this a lot in the land use chapter. The city has 3 tiers of growth historically, and that's tier 1, areas within the city's boundary that could provide infill development opportunities. Tier 2 is the PRW, the Potomac River Water Service Agreement areas, which is outside the city's boundary, but within that service area that we've agreed, we have an agreement with the county that they'll provide us water. And then tier 3 is future annexations. As we explained in the land use chapter, one of the goals is to remain flexible in the areas that the city annexes in the future, and allow the market to drive that. So we removed the rigid tier 3 boundary that was in the 2010 and just showed a hatch, or showing a hatch area as the future annexation area. One thing that we recommended, and there was a lot of discussion on, is timed annexations, where we only accept petitions to annex during times where the development pipeline could be replenished by new annexations. And the reason for that is to allow us to concentrate or select annexations that would concentrate development in certain areas that would provide more efficient community service and infrastructure. Or maybe there's competitive annexations and we're getting the best out of these applications at certain intervals. There was a lot of discussion, not sure where we're going to go as we move forward, but hopefully this chapter provides some background into why we proposed that. And the reason why we're proposing that is because right now our development pipeline has about 7,000 units in it, and that provides 7 times about 18,000 for a population of 18,000. So our pipeline right now could supply a population of about 90,000 people. When you start looking at future capacities and potential infill development plus tier 2, you start realizing that there's potential that we can provide enough units in tier 1 and tier 2 for our projected population. With that being said, there is demand for new housing units, and we do need to remain competitive in providing new homes to people who are moving up in our city, or affordable housing units, or people who are relocating from other areas of the state or other states. So the timed annexations or selective annexation times, where we can replenish the pipeline, or say every 4 to 5 years, accept annexation petitions, would allow for the existing inventory, our pipeline, plus tier 1 potential, plus areas in the PRWSA, to provide for housing units and provide additional housing units than what were projected. So when we start looking at infill development properties or potential, we look at vacant units. Right now, the city has roughly 2,000 vacant parcels.
Brandon?
Yes.
Sorry, can you tell us what page you're on?
I am on page 4-117. So right now the city has about 2,000 vacant parcels. About 70% of those, about 100 parcels out of 2,000 provide about 70% of the total acreage. So about 1,800 out of 2,500 acres. When we look at this, we realize that these lands between 0 and 3 acres may be historic parcels downtown that that have a house over 1 or 2, maybe even 3 property lines. So these numbers may be skewed, and this is a very simplistic way to calculate the potential dwelling units in tier 1. However, we calculated using the total maximum density per acre, and then inserted a multiplier of half. So out of all these parcels, simplistically, you could develop up to 8,000 units. Now, there's a lot of ways that a vacant lot wouldn't be developable. You could have a 16,000 square foot lot that maybe you could construct or subdivide into 2 8,000 square foot lots. However, it might not have street frontage, so it wouldn't be buildable. Or you have a historic house over multiple property lines that SDAT, where we derive this information, Maryland Department of Assessment and Taxation, maybe their records aren't accurate. So we felt a good indicator would just be multiplying it by half to determine a realistic infill development potential. So we got 4,000 potential units in tier 1. I still believe that's a little high. The amount of work it would take for us to go through all these parcels to figure out if they are buildable or not would be tremendous. So a ballpark figure of 4,000 is fair, but I still believe it might be a little high when you think about how realistic it is for someone to construct 4,000 units in the lands that we have now. There's not much meat on the bone for large builders or developers, and there's a few people in the city that are taking one-off parcels and constructing new homes or getting creative with lots that are subdividable. With that, we also took non-residential. and came up with 8 million non-residential square feet of potential infill. This is high. I believe this is high as well. We used a multiplier of 0.75 historically when a commercial area or non-residential lot is constructed. The FAR is roughly 75% of what they're permitted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I just think I lost service. So, okay. So our non-residential square footage is roughly about 8 million in tier 1. I still think, I believe that's high as well. We don't use it to project much in this chapter. We're mainly concentrating around residential projections. So in the tier 1, we have this map of vacant parcels. We do need to do some work on the southern boundary, but for the most part, this map just shows all the large vacant parcels. But you can see where we're getting a concentration of large vacant parcels. With that, we also provided potential redevelopment sites. So in order to look at this, we did a land to improvement ratio. We derived our information from SDAT again, and wherever the land was equal to or higher than 1, we indicated in this heat map. So these parcels would be ripe for redevelopment. We don't account for that in projecting, but it is something we should be aware of when you think about redevelopment within the city. So in tier 1, just in a brief summary, there's 1,500 vacant acres, 817 acres of residential mixed-use zoning, potential to 4,000 dwelling units, and could supply dwelling units for 10,000 new residents. Moving on to tier 2, again, this is land outside the city boundary, but always considered in the PRWSA. So this is our current, blue is current city, municipal boundaries, red is the PRWSA boundary. In this map, it shows the parcels that have always been counted in the PRWSA with development potential of 1,616 units. So when you add the 4,000 infill to the 1,600 tier 2, there's potential for 5,600 units without annexing. Tier 3, again, is just a flexible area where we anticipate growth in the next 10 to 20 years. Our proposal is still for timed and calculated annexations, and that would allow us to provide housing supply as the demand necessitates. That is derived on an extremely conservative calculation that would assume that it takes 450 CO, certificate of occupancies, for new dwelling units per year, divided by our pipeline, less 10 years, the time it takes for entitlements and construction of new units. Based on our existing housing plus pipeline, tier 1 and tier 2, we're showing enough units to provide the population till 2045. I do believe, again, that we may be a little high on tier 1. and 2045 population projection may be a little low, but this is based on the data we have today. The next section in this plan is the sensitive areas and the things we need to consider when we are projecting growth outside the city limits. Right now, inside the city limits as well, but right now we've mapped sensitive lands that includes floodplain, watersheds, forests, and we should include steep slopes here. Then we show agricultural easements that are held encumbered by the county or the state. So these lands in green or red or purple are encumbered by some sort of preservation easement. So not saying that development could never occur. However, there would be, in some of the easements, there would have to be mechanisms to release those encumbrances. Some of them are perpetual. So Route 26 here, these areas we anticipate maybe future growth around Walkersville, up towards Walkersville, there's prevalence of encumbrances. The next section is the impacts of development on our community services and public amenities. We provided a multiplier table that just shows the impact of one dwelling unit or 100 residents or so many residents to the services we provide. Very simple calculation that we can anticipate needing extra services by whatever this multiplier is. It gets a little difficult to calculate commercial water and sewer because there's so many variables. Residential water and sewer varies by townhouse, multifamily, and single family. Single family is 250 gallons per day. We show, we describe the current situation with Frederick County Public Schools. Right now, there are about 26 schools that service city residents. 12 or nearly half of those are over state rate capacity, with 3 being severely over over 125%. So this would affect future development entitlements per the APFO. On page 4/129, we describe the impacts that our projected housing provides on the school system. And we projected 3 different scenarios: equal single family townhouse multifamily, which is historically how the city has been developing, a more higher density at 20% single family, 40% town, 40% multifamily, and a lower density at 50% single, 25 town and multifamily. Single families provide the biggest impact on the school system. So the lower density, the more impact you have on FCPS schools. The higher density, the less impact. So you can see higher densities projected to provide 13,873 schools, lower densities 14,867, or students, excuse me. Next is public safety. As you can see, our crime rates have been decreasing, and we talk about the number of sworn officers needed as our population increases, to prioritize the acquisition of the new police headquarters. In addition, we talk about fire and emergency services, their current status, and the plans for future fire stations around the city, and there's 3 in their plans. And water and sewer facilities, there's a little math in this one. Right now, the city has 5.39 million gallons per day of water available. 1.47 of that water is not associated with current entitlements, so properties within the development pipeline that we have now. So right now, out of that 1.47 million gallons, if we developed at 30% single, 30% townhouse, 30% multifamily, we'd have enough water strictly for residential development. This is a very simplistic calculation for 6,700 residential units, or a population increase of 17,000, or about 120,000 above what we've provided for today. Lastly, we discussed the library system and Parks and Rec. Right now, we have adequate library systems libraries per the recommended square footage. And then recreation, if we grow to 93,000 residents in 2045, we'll need about 930 acres of parkland to meet the National Recreation and Parks Association guidelines of 10 acres per 1,000 residents. Right now we have about 800, so we would need an additional 100 acres of parkland in the next 25 years if our population grows at that rate. That's it on this chapter, so I can answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, Brandon, thank you. We will go through each of the commissioners, and they will make their comments and ask their questions. So Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brandon, is this the, well, let me, I don't know if this is appropriate, these questions are appropriate for this chapter, but has staff talked much about APFO for fire and emergency services and police in a way to fund it?
We have not had that discussion internally with the comp plan.
Yeah, I don't think that's too typical of municipalities in the state of Maryland, but it'd be one way of implementing. I'm not sure I'm an advocate of it. I just wanted to know if you guys had talked about it. In the text, occasionally I see the word direct growth. And I'm thinking in some ways the word direct might be a little bit strong. And maybe manage growth might be a little softer. And I think I've seen both used. I think in general, I prefer the managed growth. I remember Governor Glenn Denning used to call this thing, well, smart growth, he used to call it direct growth. And his advisors thought that was a little bit too harsh. So in Tennessee, they were using the term smart, and that's how we invented smart growth in Maryland. But I think it's a better word. Also, when we're talking about, and finally, when we're talking about taking advantage of vacant and underutilized parcels, and we often talk about the vacant parcels as being redeveloped and the underutilized parcels as being, I'm sorry, the vacant parcels as being developed, mm-hmm. and the underutilized as being redeveloped. And we talk about with the hope or expectation that there be more mixed uses in those redevelopments, and I suppose vacants also. Would it be appropriate also to talk a little bit about in some locations, and I know this is not land use chapter, but in some locations such as that greater density of development may be appropriate. You know, in some ways we want to talk about increasing, I mean, one way of increasing the dwelling units would be to have more annexations and more I don't want to call it sprawl, more managed growth on the exterior, but maybe on the interior. Now that we've gotten over some of the APFO constraints with the new fee, maybe we could have some more density downtown, and particularly around transit-oriented development, certain nodes, maybe along the creek. I know you don't want to get particular, but I think maybe some more emphasis about where it's appropriate to indicate mixed use and in some cases greater densities broadly. Those are my 30,000 foot comments. I think this is a very quantitative chapter. I don't know how I can question the numbers, and I'm glad to hear, Brandon, you questioning it. I think it's good to give it the sniff test just to make sure it passes the what you intuitively feel as a check. So thank you for the work and your staff, the work on this chapter. It's very good.
Thank you.
Next is Commissioner Malice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Brandon, I'm still reviewing the chapter and digesting it, so I don't have much questions right now, but I will say that one question I do have was, I was just curious, and you may have already spoken to it and it went over my head, but where did you get the multipliers for tier 1 and then for the facility and service?
So
the multiplier numbers.
So for tier 1, we used the vacant parcels within the city with their current zoning and used the maximum density for that zoning district to figure out how many parcels could be subdivided in those districts or constructed in those districts. Obviously, that's going to be 100% maximum density without any constraints, any real world problems. So we multiplied that. We felt comfortable multiplying that by 0.5 to reduce that by half for any number of reasons. There may be a mistake in the FAR for commercial. I need to go back and look at that.
Brandon, if I can just add in real quick, Joe Adkins, for the FAR for the non-residential, what we did, we took the biggest constraint to building non-residential is really parking and landscaping. Typically in the city, you don't build up past 2 stories. So we took several newer non-residential developments. We figured out the FAR for those non-residential developments, and it averaged out almost all of them were the same FAR. And until land becomes more valuable, people are going to build out instead of up. And so hopefully, eventually, downtown will start seeing redevelopment and, as land becomes more valuable. But we did do, I think it was 10 different FARs for non-residential.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. And then I guess with the facilities, or what was that? The other multiplier with the facility services.
Yeah, that table, the table on page, bear with me here, 4-126. Those numbers came from either the master plans of those departments or divisions, and through consultation with the experts or directors of those direct divisions, the police chief, the chief of fire and rescue, engineering department, the library master plan, the parks and rec recommendation, and FCPS. For the city of Frederick, our full-time staffing, that's historical. We worked with the mayor's office to figure out historically how many employees we provided per 100 residents.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is a really dense chapter. A lot of stuff in it. I wanted to first mention in the chapter that you called land use change, and you're going to change the name of that because you didn't like the name of the land use change. The last sentence that says, you know, while we want development to occur, we're not sure if people are willing to annex in because of this higher tax rate. And I just want to, first, I guess I question the need for that statement at all. And second, it's not really accurate because we don't have a higher tax rate. You're not paying twice for services. That's the whole tax equity thing that we worked out. So City of Frederick residents actually pay a lower tax rate than county residents to account for that because we do provide some of those services. But I don't know that that's really a necessary statement to have in here, whether or not somebody would be hesitant based on that.
Okay.
Let's see now. And you saw, I'm sure you saw in the Google Docs, there are lots of like little things. The thing I want to really talk about the most is this timed and calculated annexations theory. And I guess I want to express some interest and concern. We saw what happened when we stopped annexations because we didn't have water, and they backlogged and backlogged and backlogged. And then in 2009, the floodgates opened, and we just annexed a whole bunch of stuff. There are so many factors that go into why a property decides at a certain time that they're ready or, you know, interested in coming into the city. How does this really affect, you know, if we have an area that we're looking at and there are 2 or 3 or 4 different property owners, and one is ready to annex and the others are not, do we bite ourselves in the foot by saying the first one can't come in because the others aren't ready to? And what if then that to me, annexation gives the city control over the growth that occurs, what kind of development occurs. And if we say, I mean, I don't want to say that it's a rubber stamp, because it's not, but if we say no to a development that is ready to go and wants to come into the city, they're going to develop anyway, and then the city has no control over it. So I have some trepidation about how this gets coordinated in a way that does not hinder the city's ability to bring new lands into the city that could be beneficial and not put us at risk.
Understand, and I understand your concern, and a lot of thought has been put into this, and honestly, it could go either way. The reason why we're recommending this is right now we get annexation petitions at the will of property owners, obviously, at all different times. I've never worked in the industry, the developer industry. I don't know how those negotiations occur. I would assume that if someone is considering selling their property to be annexed, it's a huge decision, right? So it's thought of over many years. And I think that if we say, okay, 2025 is the year we're going to accept annexations, there's a lot of discussions that lead up to that between potential developers and property owners. And I think one of the benefits is that they could have agreements that, however, I'm not sure, but they could have agreements that they will purchase it pending, you know, all the due diligence, all the annexation approvals in 2025, and we could then accept all of our annexation petitions. And if we feel that our population is growing, or we have a huge employment opportunity that's forecasted, then we could open it up at any time through a mayor and board of alderman action, or wait every 4 or 5 years, or until the calculated approach is when our pipeline density can absorb the extra supply. sort of rambling on here, but I feel like the benefits of accepting annexations at one time would provide the city a lot more informed decision at that time. Right now, we're getting annexation, and they sort of come in ebbs and flows anyway. And I believe that 4 or 5 year wait to accept them at one time would not hurt the industry, but I'm not an expert on that, and I hope we get public comment in that regard. I will say that during our land use discussion, it was referred to as a moratorium. It's far from a moratorium. We are always accepting, or we realize that we're gonna grow outside the city boundaries. It's just quality and coordination are the benefits.
Sure, I'm sure we will, and I hope that we do also get a lot of feedback on this. I just lost my train of thought. I had a point I was going to make. Maybe it'll come back to me here in a second. So a question about, you know, your assertion that if we accept all the annexations at a certain at 5-year or 4-year increments, so we hold everything, and then we have, again, not maybe the big floodgate like we had in 2009, but is there really a sense that by having all of those annexations being considered in 2009 all at the same time really afforded us that more comprehensive opportunity to look at growth, or was it just a big flurry?
So I worked for the city back then, but I didn't review the annexations at that time. And I believe Joe hopped off. I don't recall the discussions or the politics behind accepting those annexations. When you look back at it now, the market's changed so much that a lot of them have been, the agreements have been revised to reflect market conditions today. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. However, some of those annexations are far different proposals than the time that we first reviewed them when they petitioned. I feel like a timed and calculated approach would afford us the opportunity to review and really analyze the petitions that meet the needs for the city in that 10-year range, and there's less speculation per se.
Okay, so I guess without belaboring the debate, because it is going to be a debate, we're going to continue to have this discussion. What would help me is if there was some real evidence that by having a large number of annexations come through the pipeline at the same time really did provide that opportunity for better analysis and cohesiveness, that might compel me. But I need to see that. I need some evidence of that. I need some, whether it's anecdotal or analytical or whatever, because I'm not convinced at this point about that particular thing. So that would probably help all of us, I think. And, you know, if there are other jurisdictions that are taking this kind of approach, it would be great to have that information and how it has worked for them. All right. I'm scrolling so fast that my comments are disappearing, or I didn't have any right there. I'll stop now and just say that was my biggest question. Let me just take a look real quickly and see if I have anything else that pops up. I'm going to mute for a few seconds.
Okay.
And feel free to jump in.
Why don't I jump in with my first? I do have a number of questions and comments. So my first question is actually will follow Kelly's, this whole conversation, and it's a quick one. I was just wondering, Brandon, that given all the public comment on the land use chapter, were any changes made as a result of the public comment to either that chapter or this chapter?
So there were changes made in the land use section. There have been changes for all the chapters, revisions made based on public comment. The reason for that initial proposal was through a lot of internal discussions, plus the initial survey a lot of people who responded to the initial survey, it was about concentrated growth, infill, and within city boundaries, and higher quality growth and development. Subjective, but when you analyze all the public comment, and by far they were the two most, and traffic, three most commented, or most of our comments revolved around that, and then having internal discussions about providing efficient public services, and starting to concentrate areas where we can provide better public services, trash pickup, police, etc. That's really where that proposal came from. It could go either way. Regardless, I believe that the developers are providing good quality developments when they annex, and the negotiations that go with that process allows us the opportunity to really make sure it's valuable for the city. So it could go either way. Not partial to it.
I was just curious if there had been changes, and I should have said on the annexation, but I think your answer addressed that. So we'll go back to Alderman Russell.
So I didn't have any other meaty questions. I do have some comments when we get to the implementations. But again, I think that we really need to help educate people on what an annexation means, how it occurs, what occurs when we do decide, the kinds of negotiations that occur regarding, the provision of an infrastructure improvement or a traffic improvement or parks or these kinds of things. And we don't just, we don't go out and bring land into the city. It's at the request of the owner or agent, but that we do benefit in terms of public infrastructure and amenities when we do that, and we are able to control that quality of growth. So it's not necessarily a bad thing when we annex properties. So they don't, I think there's a lot of trepidation about what it means when the city grows. But again, if the growth is occurring in the city boundaries, then that's better for everybody because we're getting the infrastructure provided. That's my soapbox. I'll get off it now. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go through my questions. I think these will be fairly fast, and some of them I'm just asking for confirmation. So the first question is it's the first sentence on growth assumptions. It says, based on the population projections as well as the longer-term vision of the state, county, and city. So this longer-term vision of the state, county, and city, can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? What does that mean, longer-term vision? So
we're a priority funding area for the state of Maryland, and that's where all of us anticipate growth. The county has shown the city as their primary growth area, and then obviously we want to consume as much economic development as possible. So
okay, I kind of thought that as I thought it through. When I first read it, I went like that, and then I thought it through. So I don't know if it could use could use a little bit more meat on the bones to explain that. Question 2, on the primary growth sector, talks about the shift in the style and location of development. So what did you mean by the style of development?
Where are you?
I'm on page 4-115 in the primary growth sector, last sentence of the first paragraph. Talks about the long-term strategic the primary growth sector is to support the long-term strategic shift in the style and location of development. I was wondering, does style mean mixed use? I actually wasn't really sure.
So pretty sure this language came directly from Livable Frederick. I would assume that means, and I could revise it to take this section out, that they're concentrating on nodes of development throughout the county and transportation-oriented development, and just they're actually going to more form-based code as well. So I would assume it has to do with their shift and growth policies to.
Yeah, it seems if we put something in from theirs and we're making assumptions that we either need to change it or define it.
Okay.
I'd remove it, sorry.
Yeah.
Or remove it. On the same page, second column, I thought that it was interesting. You're talking about the multimodal and leveraging the existing assets of rail and highway. So there's two questions in here for me. And then you talk about transit. So the multimodal, would that include the rail? Would it include the BRT? Are you including bus in that? So that's one. And the second, I like this phrase, aging retail and office developments. I was wondering if there was any definition of where those are, those aging retail and office developments. So this, if we talk about it, you would think we would know where those areas are so we can then focus on it.
Sure. This is again taken from Livable Frederick, so I'll go through this and try to clarify wherever we need to.
Madam Chair, if I can just jump in, when I said remove it, I meant just remove that page.
Okay.
If it's directly from Livable Frederick, then we can't change any of it. It's essentially, it's from their document. If there is information in there that is relevant to the city that we can extract and have our own narrative, I would prefer that, because I don't think that we are necessarily in the business of promoting these growth areas outside the city of Frederick. That's the county's gig, okay? That makes sense?
Yep.
General question about the pipeline. So we talked about the pipeline for development and land use, and we talk about the pipeline here. And I do remember specifically one person's public comment on this. So my question is, how confident are we that the pipeline is going to occur? And should we not put some kind of factor on that?
I guess I don't want to speculate on developers' projects. There may be a few in the pipeline that we could assume are not going to move forward because the length or if they've expired. We can take a look at it again.
It's just a question, since this whole math equation is based on the pipeline. Not so much. That was a great comment, and I totally would support that we shouldn't make assumptions on any specific development. So it was more an overall, is it appropriate just to take those numbers? Because some of them were pretty old, if I remember correctly, like they've been in the pipeline for a long time. So anyway, it might be worth taking a look at those and doing some kind of assessment in general, if that's a good number to count on. On page 4-125, agricultural easements, last question, talks about there are several parcels, and I remember you did specifically bring this up. Several parcels encumbered by agricultural easements that may have been considered for future development. So when I read that, I think, well, who may have considered that? did the people who own the parcel, did the city, but they're encumbered? So I couldn't kind of complete that thought.
Yeah, so again, it's all speculation. When you look at the directions that the city's growing, there are up Route 26 or north of Crum Farm. There's some encumbered properties up there that could eventually be adjacent to our city boundary within the next 10 to 15 years. So that's where that came from. I could do some wordsmithing there.
Wants to develop. Okay, I don't know what that one was. Just on page 4126, talking about basically APFO or the growth impacts on public services. Again, I think I know what your answer to this is, but in another county, they were looking at this as one of the possibilities of adding to APFO, and that's hospital services. Just has there ever, and I know that's not a service that's provided by the city or county, so I didn't know if there had ever been a conversation about that.
We have not had a conversation in the planning department.
I saw Alderman Russell shake her head, so just, I think it was more in the one county, it was a citizen comments that they thought it was important that this be one of the factors of growth. Just, and then I had just a humorous comment on page 4-132 on the version that Brandon was going through. I had to laugh or smile at this. It says the city of Frederick could be more effectively served by a consolidated downtown station and stations tragically located around the outer portions of the city. So,
oh,
yeah. I knew you meant strategically, but I love that, tragically located.
Sorry about that.
That was cute. Okay, that's it for me. I'm gonna just ask for one more round of other comments and questions. So, Commissioner Burns.
I have no comments, further comments here, but when we get to the goals.
Okay, great. Commissioner Malice.
Commissioner Malice, I do have some comments and maybe a question. So back to the multiplier that we discussed, is it, and I'm still reading the chapter, so I'm not done. Is there a way to include information about how you got to the multiplier for the reader, for whoever reads that chapter understands how the numbers were derived?
The multiplier for vacant and under vacant parcels?
Right.
Okay.
And then also with the services too, the facility service, you did mention that you spoke to the subject matter experts, and that's how you got those numbers. And I think it's good for the reader to be able to say, okay, these numbers came from wherever they came from, okay, and these numbers were derived from wherever they came from. So that's one thing. Now, as I mentioned, I'm still reading the chapter. I'm not done, and I'll have my comments in the Google Docs. But when we talk about services, facility and services, and I see you mentioned everything, but I didn't see anything about, and I could be wrong, about traffic or roads. And I know we have a separate chapter for, I believe, transportation, but I would think, like, I've noticed that you mentioned housing, you know, in terms of the chapter and so forth that we've had before. It would be great to somehow link or at least give a nod to the fact that there's an understanding or realization that with this municipal growth, you know, we'll possibly have some challenges with traffic, or, you know, I don't know if that would be helpful anyway, but it's just my comment about that. And then the last comment I had was, and it was just where in my head was, I was thinking to myself, I know that we've had flooding in the past in Frederick, and the Army Corps of Engineer was looking into doing a study about it and so forth. I don't know what the results are, but I was wondering, when you looked at tier 1 and 2 and 3 and getting that information from them whenever they pass it on to us, is there some places 30 years from now that may not be livable, that may not, like, I'm just wondering, if that's factored in any way to municipal growth, like, because you had the tiers 1 where people would live, but there are some places in the city that flood frequently. So I wasn't sure whether that was an applicable comment for this chapter or not, but I thought I would just bring that up. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
To that point about flooding, and I seem to remember writing a comment somewhere in here about that, but yeah, the Army Corps is studying some areas where we have had significant flooding and trying to identify infrastructure improvements so that we can mitigate that. It's not, there are focus areas, and I don't think it's really a determination of where things will be uninhabitable because of flooding. I think the goal is to mitigate the flooding so that we don't have the issues that we're having now. But thank you, that's a good point.
Thank you.
And my only comment to what Commissioner Malice said, I started shaking my head when I was hearing that traffic is part of what can limit growth and impact. So even though we explain it more in depth in another chapter, to acknowledge that here and link it back to the other chapter, right? I think that's also what you were saying. All right, I think that's it. So let's go on to the policies then.
Okay.
One by.
I will share my screen. Okay. So I'll read through, do you want me to read through just one policy in the implementation measures or all of them?
One at a time, please.
One at a time. Okay. So policy 1, the city of Frederick will continue to encourage redevelopment of vacant and underutilized land within the current municipal boundaries. 1, the city will develop as per the tier policy outlined in the land use chapter and outlined in the land use map. The city will develop at a density higher than 3.5 units per acre. This one we are looking at currently what our average density is per acre to make, this is a carryover from the 2010 plan. So we are looking to see what our average density per acre is now and if this needs to be updated.
Okay, so on to the commissioner comments and questions, and start with Commissioner Burns.
Thank you. Getting back to what I said earlier in the text, I think I'm switching between documents. Excuse me for a second here. I had in Google Docs, I had proposed broadening the wording a little bit. Yep, now I'm back on page 18. Bear with me. All right, policy 1. That the city of Frederick will continue to encourage development of vacant land and redevelopment of underutilized land with mixed uses and greater densities in some cases within the current municipal boundary. So I'd like to get, at least in the policy, mixed uses and greater density indicated. And then I added a third implementation strategy, that with the city will encourage mixed use development. It's prevalent in the text, but it didn't seem to make it in the goals, unless it's covered in a different goal that I didn't note. That was my only comment for 1.
Okay, Commissioner Malice.
No comment.
Alderman Russell.
My initial question was, does this apply to non-residential as well as residential, and the implementation should sort of be clear? I like the addition that Commissioner Burns had made. I don't have it word for word, but the concept is sort of makes it a little more overarching and sweeping and takes everything into account. And I would support that idea that we want to encourage, however that is, mixed use.
Anything else, Alderman Russell?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Nicholas. So when I was reading the policy, then I read the implementation. I'm looking at the word, and I know we've talked about this every time. The City of Frederick will continue to encourage. And then when I look down into the implementation, neither of those things to me, possibly the density, but it really speak to encourage. And one of the things that we've talked about as a planning commission is that there are a number of things in our current land code that make it more difficult to redevelop in the downtown and do infill development. So I was suggesting an implementation item. You would have to really polish the wording here, but something. Consider revisions to the current land code to support infill development and vacant parcel development in the city. The second, as just a general question, it's like, so my first thing is I thought, how else will we encourage? And that was when I jumped to one of the ways that we can encourage is to look at our codes and how that actually supports it. And the second, the City of Frederick will develop at a density higher than 3.5 units per acre. That sounded, I don't know, I just couldn't connect that one directly with the policy to encourage redevelopment of vacant and underutilized land. That seems like a good statement. It might be a good policy. It just didn't seem to connect with that policy for me. And those were my comments.
Okay.
Let me just ask if anybody else, someone can jump in if they have any more comments or questions before we go on to policy 2.
Madam Chair, just to comment on how that applies if we are redeveloping or developing vacant and underutilized land. This has to do with, building. If you have an acre of land, not just building one house on it, encouraging, right? I mean, I guess it has to do with zoning and your density, so that we're not underutilizing these vacant parcels of land. They're being used to their maximum, highest and best use, and encouraging the density there. So we don't want low density development is what that's saying. I think that's how they tie together.
Okay, so what's not, and that makes total sense. And getting all that from a density higher than 3.5, and maybe you don't want all this in the implementation, but if somebody's reading that, it's like, okay, so what is it currently now? What does 3.5 get us to? That kind of thing. So I do understand that explanation. I just think this is a little, it doesn't quite explain it enough for me. But thank you.
I think it carries back to the R4, R6, R8, and we don't have any residential zoning that's less than 4 per acre, and that's a carryover.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Oh. And you were going to look at that, Brandon, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I will definitely put some work into that.
Okay. All right. If there are no more comments or questions, we'll go to policy 2.
Okay. Policy 2, encourage annexations in a timed and calculated manner to provide the necessary dwelling units to supply the demand of the future population projection. One, the city of Frederick shall support a variety of housing types and densities to provide opportunities for all existing and future residents. 2, continue to use the city's APFO and water allocation ordinance to provide a predictable growth rate over the next 20 years. 3, the city of Frederick and Frederick County should continuously hold a series of meetings centered on not only the best locations for new growth, but how this growth will affect facilities and how best to manage these facilities to accommodate this new growth.
Okay, comments and questions, Commissioner Burns.
Just semantics. The use of the word encourage, it almost sounds like we're saying I don't know if encourage means carrots and sticks. Maybe it does, and carrots and sticks is not a bad thing. In general, I like the use of the word manage to manage annexations. And the first policy, number 1, the city of Frederick will continue to manage redevelopment. To me, that gives more of a control, but not in a negative way. Control meaning we're managing. That's just me. I'm not sure if the rest would agree, and it's a minor thing because encourage itself is a pretty soft word. It doesn't say direct. It doesn't say require. But encourage, and maybe that's a term of art in long-term planning. But anyway, going back to what we were talking about earlier about managing the annexation rate, it did strike me that where I had read or we discussed earlier in the evening that if you don't have if you get to a point where you're getting scarce ARN lots in the city, then maybe that would help the more dense developments, infill developments to develop. Infill is often costly. The reason those lots are vacant are often because it's too expensive. The costs to cure are too great. The entitlement costs are too great. So maybe I'm kind of swinging back from where I was a few months ago when I was appalled at the fact that we would manage our annexation. Not appalled, but I was a little taken aback, and I think that in some similar to Alderman Russell, just was skeptical about that. But then again, if we can come up with a way of making it more difficult, and maybe it's a carrots and sticks approach, but make it more difficult to annex. Gosh, it's a double-edged sword. In any event, I'm going off on a tangent here. I think I think we really need to manage the annexations in some way, at least be in control of it, recognizing that market forces will control annexations. But no wordsmithing for this goal other than my rants here. Thanks.
Commissioner Malice.
Commissioner Malice, no comments or questions. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here. Not to belabor the point, but we still have to debate this, whatever this management is. And I do think Commissioner Burns has, that's a good word for it, because that's what we're trying to do is manage it. In whatever method we decide is the best, we do want to manage it. I just, my comment was that I didn't really feel like any of these implementations really spoke directly to that timed and calculated manner. They talk, they're all good things, but I'm not sure they really were implementations for that. And again, depending on what we decide that goal is going to say, the implementations may be a little bit different. I did want to say, and there's a place for these implementations if it's here in addition to some other things, but I wanted to mention that in the first one, that we support a variety of housing types and densities. And I'm just wondering if we, not just types and densities, but price points, affordability, accessibility, equity, just mention some of those things in the housing that we're providing. And then Number 3, with the series of meetings, I'm not sold on this implementation as something. Is it the city of Frederick? Are we talking about staff? Are we talking about residents? Are we talking about elected officials meeting? We're going to hold meetings, to talk about coordination. Can we just say, let's collaborate with the county and the existing property owners to
Sorry, I may have lost you.
I may have lost me too, Brandon. Thank you. With regards to number 3, I'm not feeling that. And I will just say I noted that maybe something more like collaborate with the county and existing property owners adjacent to the city to determine how are we going to best manage the future annexations. I just was not clear on what a series of meetings and with whom that was going to be.
Yeah, this was a carryover from 2010. I do understand your point, and definitely update it.
Okay, thank you. And did you catch my comments about the housing?
I did.
Okay, great, thank you. Yep. Not sure when you lost me.
So Commissioner Burns and Alderman Russell articulated very well most of my comments. So I didn't like the word encourage and didn't know what it was, and I do like the word manage. So when you look at that policy, my first thought was, just as Alderman Russell said, that these implementation factors don't seem to flow naturally from that. And what's missing in here is this in the overview chapter, there's all this explanation about the pipeline and all these metrics that are brought to bear as to why we're how many houses we need and when we need them, etc. So there needs to be something in the implementation that we continue to assess those and other similar kinds of numbers to make sure that we are on track, or if we need to revise whatever our annexation process and plan is. The first implementation factor, just well said, Alderman Russell. I thought it did not belong here. It was nice, but it didn't go here. The second one I thought was fine, and the third one I thought did not belong here. And I do like the suggestion of Alderman Russell on that one. Any other comments, questions on policy 2 before we go to the next one? All right.
Okay. Policy 3. The city will continue to work to ensure that adequate police and fire services will be available throughout existing and future growth areas. 1, continue to assess appropriate land for the construction of a central police headquarters. 2, continue to monitor emergency response times and adapt the level of service for inclusion in the development review process. 3, provide police activities facilities in higher crime areas. 4, continue to improve upon the city's level of service standards for police officers. 5, actively pursue land acquisition for multiple purpose public facilities in the northern sections of the cities. These include police, fire stations, parks, school, DPW yard, and/or library. 6, support relocation and consolidation and the construction of a new fire station as proposed in the Division of Fire and Rescue Services Master Plan.
Okay, comments and questions, Commissioner Burns?
Neither, thank you.
Commissioner Malice?
Yes, I did have comments and I guess a question or two. And I guess my comment is, I noticed that we mentioned adequate police and fire services. And I was thinking to myself, I guess, why isn't schools not included in that sentence? Because even, and I don't know if it's because, I don't know what the reason is for not including school within that sentence or that policy 3. But I thought that schools should also be mentioned. And the only time I see school mentioned is on number 5. And it just says these facilities may include a policy, a police, fire station, park, school. And so when we're talking about, growth and, APFOs, I would think that we would include schools as well. And that was just my comment. I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here with some comments and questions, probably mostly comments. So I struggle with how the city will ensure that there is adequate fire service, since we have zero control over that. Just as we have zero control over schools, zero control over a recycling program. These are things that are not under our control. So how do we have a policy that will ensure a service that we don't provide? And so I struggle with that and need to understand that a little bit better. With regard to that, well, and let me just go into the implementations, some questions. Number 2, continue to monitor emergency response time and adaptive level of service for inclusion in the development review process. What does that mean?
Again, a lot of these policies are carried over. However, many jurisdictions that do provide their own fire and rescue services do ensure that response times are within a certain threshold in the development review process. We do not, but we also do not have our own fire and rescue services to affect that. So I understand.
Right. So police service is not based on response time. Fire and rescue is. So it's a very different sort of a metric. So that kind of concerned me. Number 3, I'm just going to suggest it's police activity league services, and then change the wording to say and facilities in underserved neighborhoods. We don't have any high crime areas. As you can see, the crime rate continues to drop since 2010, save 1 year. And number 5, the facilities may include police, fire station, parcel, blah, blah, blah. There's no discussion in the foreseeable future for a second police building on the north side. We're struggling to get a police headquarters consolidated, so I don't see that. And I think actively pursue land acquisition. Are we talking about development proffers? Are we talking about purchase? Or I'm just a little unclear on that. And then the last one, as a point of debate, support the Division of Fire and Rescue Services master plan. One of the elements in that master plan that is mentioned is that they're looking to consolidate the downtown fire stations and leave one station downtown and move the rest out to the periphery. And this is based on their response times, etc. There has been some debate, and will continue to be, I think, on the vulnerability of the downtown core as a higher risk for fire hazard based on the age of the buildings, the construction materials, the lack of fire suppression. So I don't know that there is yet a consensus that we really fully support all of the parts of that plan. So that's something I think we should debate.
Okay.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nicholas, well, I actually really liked hearing Alderman Russell's comments. I know that this is an area of particular passion and expertise for her. Number 3, I actually really do like and support the change from higher crime areas to underserved areas. My comment before I heard this is, where did this come from? While this might sound logical, there was no text to support this in the implementation. And it just, so that was my comment there, but I do support the suggested change. And number one, so my reaction on that was continue to assess. We've been looking at this police headquarters for a long time, and this continue to assess feels like, oh, the next 10 years we're going to continue to assess. So either I think it needs to be more firm that you have a decision by a certain amount of time, or this actually gets done, or at the end of the 10 years, we can put a check in the box. Yep, we continue to assess for 10 years, but no action was taken on it. So, those are my comments. Any further comments or questions before we move on?
Yes, I just have one comment to make, just to follow up to what Alderman Russell said. I mean, maybe it's possible for to do a complete review of Policy 3 to ensure that it's, I guess, somewhat more, realistic within maybe citing things that are within our control.
Understand. I will.
So that way, when it's measured, we can actually achieve what we set out to, that's the.
And Alderman Russell, I'll just jump in and appreciate Commissioner Nicholas's sentiments about the police headquarters. There are a couple of places in here where it talked about assess and plan and acquisition, and this is something that's, let's get it done. And it's beyond assessment. We know we need it. We have to figure out where and what. So thank you for that.
Great. All right, on to Policy 4 then.
Okay. Policy 4, the city will continue to protect and conserve the existing water and wastewater supply systems. 1, implement improvements to the water supply systems in order to provide reliable water service to all city residents and improve water system losses and consumption rates. 2, undertake a public awareness campaign to educate the residents and commercial businesses on practical conservation methods. 3, consistently meet all regulatory requirements to help protect public health and the environment and the environmental impact on our water tributaries.
Comments and questions, Commissioner Burns.
Sorry for the delay. I have no comments or questions.
Commissioner Malice.
I think the only question where I have a question mark, because this is my first time seeing this, is improve water system losses. What does that mean? That's number 1. Sorry, that's number 1.
Yeah. So right now, our water system incurs a certain percentage of water supply loss through inefficiencies in the pipes, small cracks, breaks, etc. So there's efforts by DPW and engineering to constantly, systematically go through our pipes and reduce that by relining or other improvements.
Gotcha. Thank you. Oh, I don't have any other questions or comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell. So implementation 1 is great and talks about water supply. I'm just wondering, in the policy, we talk about existing water and wastewater supply systems. Is it worth breaking those apart and having water and implementations and wastewater and implementations, because they don't necessarily translate across boundaries?
Okay.
So the water service and the improved water system losses.
Yes, that makes sense.
Right. Okay.
There was.
Are you there?
Sorry, I'm having internet issues. I said, yes, it does make sense. So the 2010 plan had 1 policy to conserve water supply systems, and then 1 policy to or conserve wastewater. Then there was only one implementation under wastewater, so I tried to consolidate that, but I will definitely take a look at it again.
And I think we could probably flesh out some more implementations for wastewater in terms of, you know, the ENR and all of those different things and protecting the environment. To me, number 3 is actually a requirement. We have to do this. So I'm not sure it's an implementation. We're required by law to, you know, meet all those regulatory requirements. And then here's where I had the note about the flood mitigation, and I don't know if that fits into this at all or not, but there it is, and that's all I have.
Okay, Commissioner Nicholas, before I give my comments, we are finishing up policy 4. There are 2 more policies, so we're not that far from public comment. And I do not see any phone numbers on the line. So if anybody's interested in giving public comment, the number, as you can see up there, is 929-229-5669, and the passcode is 208-693-740 #. So my only comment in this policy was, should we not, I mean, it's all about protect and conserve what's existing. Should we not also talk about assessing, investigating the capacity for expanding the water and the waste water systems?
I agree. That's a very good point.
And that's all I had. Any more comments or questions before we go to the next policy? All right, we're on to 5.
The city will continue to communicate with Frederick County about future development projects to ensure adequate capacity of infrastructure and services, enrollment capacity for the growing population and projected growth. Continue to work with Frederick County Public Schools to identify potential school sites that would serve city residents. Continue to work with Frederick County Public Libraries to ensure adequate library facilities are provided to the city residents.
Comments and questions, Commissioner Burns?
What came to mind that was missing, since we're talking about elements of infrastructure that the county is pretty much controlling, and that might be transit. Maybe continue to work with Frederick County on rerouting of transit routes as development, as new development comes online. That's it.
Commissioner Malice.
Commissioner Malice, I was actually thinking the same thing. And because we have infrastructure and services, I was just wondering, you know, because when we talk about services and infrastructure, we're also talking about, you know, fire and rescue and police officers. And I'm just thinking to myself, with that policy 5, should some of what was in the previous policies, the implementation, be in this section? I don't know. Just a thought. Because you're talking about infrastructure and services, and I would think that would also include, like Ron had said, transportation and fire and rescue and police. That's my only comment. Just a thought.
Noted. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I would suggest that rather that continuing to communicate, that we continue to collaborate and coordinate, something a little more meaty than just, hey, we're going to build some more on the phone. And I know there is an incredible amount, and I think that needs to be acknowledged, incredible amount of collaboration that goes on with all of this. And I just think we should acknowledge that. That's my only thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nicholas, I like that substitution of the collaborate and coordinate. And actually, I was thinking about roads. So as we work on development, no matter where we do, sometimes, well, not wherever, but there's city roads, there's private roads, there's county roads, and sometimes there's state roads, et cetera. So I think we're all saying, basically, let's flesh this out a little bit more and expand the services that we would continue to collaborate and coordinate with Frederick County on.
Agree. Understand.
Any other comments or questions before we go to the last policy?
I do, Madam Chair, and I apologize. What is meant by services enrollment capacity? Is it we're ensuring adequate capacity of infrastructure and services enrollment capacity?
It's a typo. There's a typo in there. I don't know what it is right off the bat, but I will fix it.
Okay. Doesn't say what you thought it said.
No.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to policy 6 then.
6, establish and maintain a monitoring system to measure progress towards achieving the policies of the Municipal Growth Chapter. Design and implement a land use monitoring system based on measurable results directly related to the objectives. It should be goals 1 through 6, policies 1 through 6.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes, it's 2020, so all objectives should be quantitative and measurable. Very noble.
Commissioner Malice?
Commissioner Malice. I second Ron's sentiments. I would just say that I would possibly add a second implementation that speaks to communication. So like once you design and implement and you measure, who are you providing this information to? Is it city officials? Will the people who are residents of the city get an opportunity to view it on the website? Like, how do we know where we are and where we're going? Who are you communicating that information to? So I think that's equally important. Thank you.
Alderman Russell?
Alderman Russell. To Commissioner Malice's point, which by the way is outstanding, it makes me think that as we move forward, should we think about, or are we thinking about, some sort of information portal or dashboard for all of these policies so that anybody can go and look and see how we're measuring up to what we have set ourselves up to do?
That's a very good point. Haven't thought about having something consistently displayed on the webpage, but that's a great point. In the implementation chapter and in the introduction chapter, we do talk about a benchmarking process where we provide the Planning Commission, Mayor and Board of Aldermen a benchmarking report every 1, 2, 5, 10 years.
And I think to Commissioner Malice's point, that benchmarking report should be also presented to the public. That's a great idea.
I support those comments, and I have no other comments to this. So, so it's great. And I am, again, I'm looking at who's in this meeting, and there are no phone numbers. So we'll give the number, if you can show it one more time, and I'll say it. But it looks like right now there's not going to be any public comment. Call 929-229-5669. Passcode is 208-693-740 #, and we will wait 30 seconds, see if anybody pops up.
Perhaps we should give something to the first 500 callers.
Yeah.
What are you providing, Commissioner Burns?
We'll think of something. I have a lot of ties I want to get rid of. I don't need them anymore. My battery's about to die.
Well, I think it's going to be dying right on time. Not sure an entire minute has gone by, but we've said the number twice in the past 10 minutes. So it looks like no one is calling in for public comment. There will be another bite at the apple with the mayor and board, but that ends our virtual workshop for the comprehensive plan and our municipal growth chapter. As Brandon said, the next virtual workshop will be Monday night, June 1st. Again, it's at 6 o'clock, and it will be the implementation chapter. And meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.